Hi, in this mission we are going to go to Eve and Gilly. Of course we are going to land on them and come back safely with a full science package, so theoretically this lander could do every science possible. Now, the whole thing is very huge, so getting into orbit took a lot of time because the game was so slow, like 8 frames per second, and it was running third of the real-time speed. So yeah, it took like 20 minutes to get into orbit. It's relatively easy to get into orbit. I always manage to do it without the cruise stage, so just with these chemical rockets. However, after that the cruise stage is very slow, so the escape maneuver is not an easy one. It has to be done in several steps. Here I did it in 4 steps because I simply move away from the burn point on orbit. Now the lander is around 177 tons. It's capable of returning from sea level. In fact, it's capable of returning from the sea itself. This is tested, so it's possible. It could take a small rover with it, mostly from physics-less part, because taking it down doesn't really consume much fuel, and we wouldn't take it back, so it would be possible. Now the design is so that the final parachute is on the cruise stage for the lander can, which means that it doesn't take it down to the surface of Eve. This meant additional like 200 or 300 meters per second, the delta V in the lander. It wasn't really necessary. I could go into orbit every time, but it was really on edge, so I decided this. Originally that parachute was stuck on the top of the lander can. Now it's empty. So finally, after breaking away, I did this inclination change. Actually I did it in 2 steps. I don't know why. I was afraid that I will not make it in time, but it is quite fuel consuming this way. So yes, the easy way is always to do first the inclination change where you can, and then wait on the orbit and do the acceleration or deceleration depending on the target body. This is not the most efficient way. The most efficient way is to do them at once at one position, which consumes less fuel, but that one is harder to do, has to play around with maneuver nodes, and I thought well, doesn't matter, so I did it like this. There was no launch window this time, so I had to do it the longest way. This burn was 10 minutes in Kerbal time. Even with the 4 times physics acceleration, it took a lot of time. This is the drawback of nuclear engines. However, they arrived with a lot of remaining fuel, what I could use later on. So I tried to make an equatorial orbit as I usually do. It turned out that it was not completely perfect. It had around 2 degrees of tilt. I didn't take this into account when I was going into orbit with the lander, so I had to correct for that later. Here I messed up the aero capture. I didn't capture in a correct orbit, so I had to use the engines to slow me down in this elongated path. And later the aero braking was very slow. I didn't move into the atmosphere low enough, so it meant that I had to do several passes. But it's good to be conservative on the aero braking maneuvers. It just takes some time. Not with the aero capture, so that was obviously a problem. later on in this video we will see that this design choice of the parachutes will cause a problem, that it's hard to get into the cruise stage with the lander can, which is the only remaining part of the lander, because the space between them is very tight, so has to be very precise, the aim. So after I got to a nice circular orbit at 122 kilometers altitude, I disconnected this huge burden, the lander, but I had to wait for a while. I did it in incorrect direction, so I had to wait for a while until the cruise stage floated away from my direction of burn. I wanted to land next to this sea there, but because of this weight it took quite a while to start my burn, and I missed it. Those four engines are for braking only, and they cannot hold this lander at all in the gravity of Eve, but it's enough to brake them. These gears come really handy because they can take a lot of punishment. In case of water landing they are useless, so then the engines have to be used to decelerate to around 5 meters per second or slower. The slide ladders are for the science package. It means that the guy can take the data from them. This is the asparagus staging. The science package goes out first, so the data has to be taken out. The dual engine tanks are there because of the thrust to weight ratio. This upper staging has different engines, and they start to work in the lower atmosphere, which means that they lose some delta V, but they are still enough to get into orbit. Here there was this inclination change. I missed this during ascent. Normally I correct for this during ascent, and it doesn't require additional delta V. But now I had so much fuel remaining that I could do it like this. The whole lander is designed for 0 altitude, which means that there will be a lot of fuel remaining otherwise, which really caused a problem during docking. Here I'm going towards the cruise stage. So when I was very close, I detached this fuel tank, and it pushed me away from the cruise stage, which meant I had to go back to my target. I was already there, but I had to go back. It was quite annoying. I never had to do that because during testing I always used up every little drop of fuel from that, so it was no problem. Always just the lander can returned. Here's the docking, and got stuck in the parachutes. And after that I realized that the hatch is blocked, so I had to undock and dock again in a rotated position, so that I will be able to make my EVA on Gilly later on. After that it was just a burn in some random direction, the remaining fuel of these huge tanks, which is actually just spare fuel. The upper part of the cruise stage has enough delta V to return to cabin from Eve, even if these tanks are empty. There's a way to detach these tanks in a way that they don't create space debris. Just braking at the high point of the elongated orbit means that we can drop them into Eve atmosphere safely. So after coming this far, I did an inclination change for Gilly, which at this high orbit doesn't take a lot of delta V. And then I just had to wait for an encounter to happen. And of course landing on Gilly is very easy. There's almost no gravity. In fact, I had to burn downwards to get there in time. I didn't want to weigh that much, floating almost weightlessly downwards. I didn't do any science here, although I could have, because this one also has a full science package. After that I escaped from Gilly, some random direction, well, not completely random actually, it was upwards, getting out from that slowpoke planet. And the most efficient way to get out of here would be to break from Gilly towards Eve, and at the periapsis burn away from Eve in prograde direction, with the Obert effect. Of course, this is the most efficient, but I didn't do it this way. I just went straight out because I had so much fuel remaining in this final stage of the cruise stage. So after an inclination change, I just waited for my position and did the burn towards Kerbin, which still took quite a lot of time, even in this light form of this ship at this point. Corrected for equatorial orbit and then did the aero capture, which was again not so perfect. Somehow lately these don't turn out so well. After that, several aero braking maneuvers. I don't know why I took so much interest in this. I had so much fuel remaining that I could have done the braking completely by the engines, but this is how I usually do it, so this is what I did now. Circularized orbit, and then detached the lander can with the decoupler along with the parachutes. So these parachutes will take us down and leave the cruise stage in orbit. It's worthwhile to do it this way because then we can get both landing bonuses for both crafts. Otherwise one of them will vanish. I don't know why. Unfortunately, I accidentally activated the parachutes in orbit, and that means it's not possible to repackage them because they still didn't open, so I ended up short because of the additional drag, so I was quite far away from Kerbal Space Center. After that, there was time to land with the cruise stage. Normally it would contain a two-man crew for the science lab. It was empty this time, but still had to recover it from orbit. Here I did a mistake during the atmospheric approach. I burned downwards, so I ended up short again. I thought I'm going too fast, but I wasn't. So after that I burned the remaining fuel to trying to get closer to the space center. But anyhow, I landed safely with this one too. Thanks for watching. Bye.